This year's preliminary election for City Council was marked by a dearth of candidates and, not surprisingly, by low voter turnout. It happens the only places where the election took place were parts of Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Rosendale, and Jamaica Plain. As our guest points out, that means the election was yet one more test for political clout in communities of color. We'd like to welcome the founder and the executive director of the New Democracy Coalition, Kevin Peterson. Thank you very much for being with us, Kevin.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
First of all, for people who didn't study the numbers too closely, how bad was it as far as turnout?
Well, it was awfully bad. 78,000 voters live in the combined districts of 4 and 7 city council districts. 7% turnout. 93%, in other words, 93% didn't bother to vote. That says to me, a person who's been involved in this type of work for years, that there is a civic and an electoral crisis within communities of color that needs to be addressed.
Well, you know, if you look at what happened here, the timing of this vote and what there was to vote on, you would say this is not a great yardstick we're talking. It's not about the inclination to vote or the level of political sophistication. Is that there really wasn't much of a draw for people, or was there?
Well, I think there was. I mean, I think both races in District 4 and District 7 provided opportunities for voters to decide on a different leadership direction, as all elections do. But particularly in District 4, Yancey versus Campbell, there was a very pitched battle about where that district is going to go, and the implications could be dramatic. So for that district, District 4, to vote in such low numbers is embarrassing. Same case with District 7 in Roxbury and South End. There were a number of challenges. I believe that was the most populated race in terms of challengers. The reason why so many voters stayed home is mind-boggling.
Talk about District 4. This is for the council seat that's mostly in Dorchester, Mattapan, with a little bit of Rosendale and Jamaica Plain. Charles Yancey's been there for, what, 32 years?
32 years, 16 terms. 16 terms, yeah.
And I guess one of the things that surprised me about this is that unless you got an incumbent that's really done a lot of damage to themselves, they're hard to get rid of, and especially when there's low turnout. And here we are, low turnout, and the challenger gets more votes than the incumbent.
Yeah, historically, low turnout is the advantage of the incumbent. So, I mean, that speaks to the hard work that the challenger has been doing. Charles Yancey's has no inflicted wounds. This may be a case where he's just being bested by a very well-financed and a very savvy campaigner. So that's the situation there. I do want to pivot to the point that there is a real crisis, as I say, within the African American and Latino communities in terms of voting. I think that part of the crisis needs to be it needs to be directed towards the failure of some of the institutions within the community, not necessarily the campaigns. But historically, you had the black churches, social service agencies, civil rights agencies really putting an effort into ensuring that voter registration was high and voter turnout was high. I think that during these elections, they sat on their hands and the voters didn't come out.
What could the churches have done? And I have to admit, if you schedule a candidate forum, people say it's a hot night in August. The last thing I want to do is listen to candidates. So, I mean,
churches in the black community on Sundays urged their souls to go out to the polls. That's what black preachers do historically in Boston and across the country. They send out a strong message to their congregation, which are more likely to vote than non-church going people, by the way. That hasn't been happening in a consistent way within churches, but also, like I said, our civil rights organizations, our social service agencies. I think they've dropped the ball in terms of leadership, in terms of getting the vote out, and that needs to change.
Explain why that's important, because whoever wins in the final election, you know, they're going to hear from people in their district. They want this, they want that, and they'll say, go to the mayor and make sure he delivers for you and your constituents. So I guess if the turnout's low, that doesn't work very well.
Well, the mayor and elected officials are supposed to be responsive to all voters and all communities. But history has shown us that in communities that don't show their ability to exert their power at the polls are less likely to be responded to in times of need. So it's important that Roxbury vote at par or even better than West Roxbury, for example, that the South End is competitive with South Boston. So it's very critical, particularly when you look at people who live in very poor neighborhoods who depend on very critical services like the public schools or police protection. Their ability to impact elected officials, particularly the mayor's office, I think very much depends on their ability to impact who's mayor or who's the city councilor during election years.
The other thing I've noticed that seems to be a correlation here is between voter turnout and asking for help from City Hall. It just seems that people who tend to turn out actually ask for more.
They ask for more, and those who don't turn out don't ask for anything and don't ask for much, and therefore suffer much, I think. So it's important that we re-educate voters and educate them on a consistent basis, register voters, and get them out to the polls on election day. Nothing is so much more critical than those elements happening every year on a consistent basis. And if our elected officials and the leaders of our central institutions within these communities fail to do that, they're failing the voters and the residents in those districts.
If you look at these two district races here, you've got, there is some competition against Tito Jackson and Roxbury with Charles Clemens. In District 4, where we had this surprising vote, some people might say, oh my gosh, I wished I'd voted because, whether you like one candidate or the other here, you just feel like if there's going to be a change, a lot of people should weigh in.
Yeah, I mean that's important. But Chris, I think what's even more important is that we develop a culture of civic participation where personalities aren't the key in terms of drawing people out to vote. Andrea Campbell and Charles Yancey should be, as personalities, should be negligible. What should be on the voters' minds are what are the needs in the communities that need to be addressed, and how can we exact pressure on whomever is elected, notwithstanding the personality, whomever is elected, so that that community gets what it needs through the exertion of its pure political power.
Oh, speaking of whomever, there's also a large race going on, so you want to make sure people running at large consider these populations important too.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. They represent, well, all the city councils represent everybody across the city council, just in terms of voting around policy. But it's also important that the citywide candidates who traditionally have not campaigned much within the communities of color because the votes have been so low, it's important that they come into these communities because they should be focused on the importance of civic engagement. But it's also important that the voters in those respective communities, those so-called minority communities, put pressure on those citywide candidates to come into their community to explain why they're running for office.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
From the New Democracy Coalition, Kevin Peterson. We'll have more news in just a moment.